I have found such incredible ways to work and to live as a physician. And by the way, quadruple my income. I told you my starting salary was $125,000. Last year, I cleared $500,000. Still as a general pediatrician. And as I told you, spending the summer in Europe and working remotely half the time. And so just seeing that this is so possible despite being told it wasn't. And that's what gets me.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex 𝗪𝗏.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Boy, do we have a super fun episode for you today. This was an incredible episode with today's guest, Dr. Naomi Lawrence Reed. She is a board-certified pediatrician and the founder of Doctoring Differently. She has been doctoring differently, and she has made it her mission to help physicians like you and me discover non-traditional clinical and non-clinical jobs that create more flexibility, income, and joy in our lives and careers. In this episode, we talk about all kinds of different non-clinical paths, such as locums, per diem, VA disability exams, expert witness work, medical, Botox, and aesthetics. So many really cool things that she's doing, and so many ways that might be able to help you break the golden stethoscope or break the golden handcuffs, if you will, and practice medicine and live life how you want to. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with Dr. Naomi Lawrence Reed. Dr. Naomi Lawrence Reed, welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for taking the time from sunny San Diego. How are things going?
Sunny as always. Thank you for having me, Dr. Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Really glad to have you on the podcast. It's been fun following your journey along on Instagram, Doctoring Differently, and it's been really cool to see how you've been doctoring differently. And for example, if I'm not mistaken, you just came back from a locums gig. Is that correct?
That is correct. I have been doing locums since pretty full time since 2019. So it's been about 6 years, and I'll fly somewhere or drive somewhere, come home, but it's been not the heavy lift that I think a lot of residents or early career docs think it is. So happy to get into it more.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely will. That's something we haven't talked about too much on the podcast is locum. Okay. So definitely excited to learn more about that. But before we get there, do you mind telling us about your early medical career? How did your path start? And then how did that start in traditional pediatrics?
Right, sure. So I did my residency in New York City, a general pediatrician. I imagined a pretty typical career as a full-time clinical pediatrician. I actually thought I may work in a pediatric ER. So I moved to San Diego right after residency. I began working in a pediatric ER as, I hadn't done a fellowship yet, but it just was working, and quickly learned, this was in my early 30s, quickly learned that this was just not a career that I could see myself doing for the next 30, 40 years. In an ER, of course, you're working overnights and weekends and holidays, and it's just a very, very constant grind. And at the same time, being a pediatrician, falling to the very bottom of any physician pay scale. Within, I would say, 2 years, I began to start to look up and look around and think, okay, what else is there for me?
Okay. Yeah, that can be tough too, kind of that arrival fallacy sometimes of, hey, you've been through all this training and then you get there and you get the attending job and you're like, oh, I'm not as fulfilled as I thought that I was. It sounds like after those couple of years, you started to explore some more opportunities outside of like full-time clinical medicine. What did those look like, or what initially drove your interest to get started looking at some more atypical avenues?
Yeah, that's a great point. When I started to have that itch, talking to my friends, my colleagues, my classmates, it was, their advice was, got to do a fellowship, or, go get that MBA, or go do an anesthesia fellowship or something else. The answer always seemed to be more education, more fellowships, more degrees. And that just didn't feel right to me. I thought I gave my whole 20s to this. I've given my whole life up until now to this, but more education doesn't feel like the answer. And in fact, it makes it to me, it felt like I'd be even more stuck, if I can say, in a very conventional academic center, full-time position, kind of still on the wheel. So, if I'll describe kind of my aha moment, or I'd like to call it my villain origin story, in that I went into my shift in that PZR, as many ERs have, a small back office for charting for doctors, 2 desks, 2 chairs, 2 computers. And I walked into that room, and the chair that was available, the armrest was broken off, and there were just shards of metal, shooting up. And there's a little Post-it note from someone had written. It said, administration is aware, we're working on it. We got you. And I thought, okay. So I do my whole shift. I chart with my arm, tucked against my flank, so I'm not impaled. See my patients, write my notes, do my shift, leave. I come back the next day or the day after expecting to find, a new chair. But instead, administration had wrapped diapers around the shards of metal that were protruding from the chair. And I stood there for, maybe about 10 to 20 seconds. And in that moment, the months and the years of discontent, of, non-negotiable salaries, of, the feeling like I was not going to really ascend in this department, it just all came to me at that moment. And I knew where I stood. I felt the level, quite frankly, the disrespect was so loud in that moment. Now, that wasn't my office. It was the office of all of us, right? But it really landed with me in a very uncomfortable way. And I submitted my letter of resignation that night.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like a lot of us have the broken chair moments and similar stories where it's like something as simple as just replacing a chair is all that it would have taken to show you some degree of respect, which you absolutely earned. And there's little things like that are happening all across the healthcare system. And I'm glad that you had the courage to submit your resignation, be like, hey, I'm not going to put up for this. If they can't take care of their chairs, how are they going to take care of you? Exactly. And how are they going to take care of patients well too? That's the other thing that's pretty sad.
I mean, these are hospital systems. This one has a billion dollar annual, revenue stream. So it felt time. Now I'll tell you, I want, my story to be visibility for people who don't have a plan, doctors who don't have a plan. We love a good plan. We want a nice, clean, long runway that we can see to the end. But in that moment, after seeing that chair, I knew I had to resign, and I didn't have a great plan. I didn't have any plan. I just knew that I couldn't stay there. At the time, I was 33. I had student loans. I had almost $200,000 of student loans. I was renting a small 1-bedroom apartment, driving my med school Corolla, loved her dearly, but that I didn't see any way beyond my current situation. But at the same time, I was so unhappy and felt so disrespected that I just figured, I've got this medical degree, medical license, we're going to figure it out. And what that next step looked like for me was ultimately going per diem, which is not a wild thing. But to tell my friends and classmates and colleagues that I was going per diem, you would have thought I was, moving to Bali to, I don't know, be a scuba diver. It was like, it felt so foreign and so off of our usual, career trajectory. Nurses go per diem. Doctors don't do that. Or if they do, they better have a very good reason for it. But it was just, I need to pay these bills. I have a degree that can allow me to do so. I'm going to leave this institution and stay in my town, stay in my community, but just work, hourly, no obligation to the department. I can find my own health insurance, but I can still practice clinically in the specialty that I'm trained to and in familiar work. So that was just the absolute best thing that I did. So for doctors who might think, I can't quit this job, whatever you're doing, there is a way out and a way through. For me, it was simply going per diem. It changed everything, and it allowed me to actually breathe. And I think my cortisol levels went down, and I was able to just see, understand what I wanted out of this career. And I know that might sound all, a little kind of frou-frou, but it's so true. We never get a chance to actually think about what we want and how we want to work and live. We're always told exactly what the path is, what we're supposed to do, what we have to do. But going per diem allowed me to actually take a step, a breather, and consider my next step even after that.
How would you like to build real estate cash flow without dealing with tenants, toilets, or late night maintenance calls? This episode is brought to you by Rent to Retirement. If you're a busy physician or professional who wants passive income and long-term wealth through real estate, Rent to Retirement has been helping investors do exactly that for over 15 years. They offer fully managed turnkey rental properties in some of the best markets in the country, including opportunities priced up to $40,000 below market value. Their properties have delivered average projected returns in the 15 to 20% annual range. And in some cases, you can get started with as little as 5% down. The best part is, these are often A-class properties generating $500 per month or more in passive income. And their team, they handle the heavy lifting, including property management. Thousands of investors have used this strategy to generate portfolios, creating over $10,000 per month in passive income. To learn more, click the link below in the show notes or visit renttoretirement.com. And be sure to check out episode 70 of the Physicians and Properties podcast, where I sat down with CEO Dr. Zach LeMaster to break it all down. That is awesome. Yeah. I didn't even know a whole lot about per diem jobs, or that they even existed. And then one popped up here in Colorado Springs and through a bigger healthcare system here. But I was like, you know what, let me just look into this. And because I'm also looking for that flexibility and the freedom to work on real estate ventures. And then I'm probably going to work part-time at a direct primary care practice. And so I was like, let me just see what this is like. And then maybe I'll just use this to kind of supplement here and there. And anyways, long story short, they were telling me about it. I'm like, this sounds amazing. They're like, yeah, you can work as many shifts as you want or as few shifts as you want. And we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. It's $10.99. I hope that's okay. I'm like, that sounds great. I can be my own boss and do what I want and not be on call. And so I'm really looking forward to that. So per diem, maybe something, but it wasn't really marketed. I saw one like little line somewhere and I was like, I'm just going to call and see what happens. And then it led to the job. And so for folks who are out there, you know, thinking about it, it can be a really good way to still make pretty good money. I mean, the crazy thing is with this job, if I worked 10 shifts a month, I would make my Air Force salary.
That's exactly. I never once dropped below my full-time salary working per diem. And by the way, they ask you, hey, would you like to work this weekend? Would you like to work this holiday? And you can say no. We're not used to we are voluntold to do things, and we're not used to having even that option to say no. But even having that option felt like such a win. It was a great first step. And by the way, you just displayed a great point that I teach a lot of my students about, which is just pick up the phone, call, inquire. Even if a lot of people, you want to wait till you see that perfect high paying job that's fully remote, and then you'll maybe call if you meet all the qualifications. But if you see something that even slightly interests you, it costs nothing to pick up the phone and call and ask. So great job.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think too, if some folks listen to this are probably thinking, well, I want to start like a direct primary care practice or I want to do concierge medicine or something else that requires some time in building up a practice. Like this is a great way where you can build up your practice, still have some good income coming in, but still have the flexibility and the time to do that. And so I think it's a really great opportunity. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, great point. It doesn't have to be, I quit my full-time clinical job right now and I just step out and I'm now a full-time entrepreneur or full-time pursuing a new venture. There can be a nice ramp up, ramp down to your next, as you are growing your next venture, whatever it is. And the best part about per diem jobs is there's no non-compete. You can have as many, if you're someone who's worried about, I have enough shifts in a month to cover my bills. If, you're in a community that has multiple practices, hospitals or clinics, you could have multiple per diem contracts and just pick, if one doesn't need you as much, go to the other one. I mean, there's just the variety and the flexibility is, I think, paramount, and having at least at the beginning of some sort of career transition, having a good per diem in the bag is a great place to start. But I've spoken enough about per diem. I think your listeners know now how I feel that I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a couple months before I start there, but looking forward to having that flexibility for sure. Well, per diem, love that. What are some other kind of atypical medical paths that you've gone down or learned about or teach about?
Right. So locums was the next one. And I'll tell you, as a pediatrician I trained in New York City, locums was a bad 6-letter word. And my administration residency admin directly told us, do not pick up the phone when they call, do not respond, do not engage. They are so pushy. Before you know it, you will be, working a 3-month shift in Arkansas. And in my mind, I'm from the East Coast, Northeast. I live in California. I thought that locums was only A states or states that begin with A. And there's absolutely no shade to states that begin with A, but they were always just very far from where I lived. And that was my assumption of where all locums was. It was, very rural. It would have taken, 3 flights and a train and a bus to get there. But, I think by the time you're a second-year resident, you're getting calls and phone calls, texts. How did they get my number? And they're starting to reach out and they may mention big numbers. And maybe you'll hear from one, or maybe you see small numbers. Either way, I think if you're primary care, you may see numbers you don't like from recruiters. But soon after I started going per diem, and again, just had a second to breathe and be and live and pay my bills, but not be going. I called a recruiter back, or I answered the phone when she called and just had a conversation and ended up, I told her, I was like, I'm in California. I don't want to get another medical license at this point, but I feel like this is a big state and I should be able to find something here. And it took a few conversations back and forth, but I was able to find a locums gig, or she presented one that was a 3-hour drive from where I lived in San Diego. Initially, again, I've over time negotiated higher and higher rates. But at the time, I was making more in a week than I was making in 2 months at my old job. Wow. I was, able to make, $2,000 a day flat. There are a few different ways of how these pay structures can go. But, at the time, I was able to make $2,000 a day with a $200 an hour for any callback or any work in the hospital, malpractice covered, travel covered, and a 1099 as you described. So as a 1099, you're able to enjoy the world of tax deductions if you have your own kind of corporation, as you know, much better than a W-2. So over the course of the years, I was able to, really pay back my loans and enjoy a really good lifestyle for me, where I would just go away for maybe a week, work straight, but then come home and have the rest of the month, my bills paid and then some. And then that kind of opened the door of my curiosity to say, okay, now what else can I do? One of those next was veteran disability exams. And you mentioned that you are soon to separate from the Air Force. Congratulations. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I am not military. I have no military in my family. Despite living in Southern California, where there is such a military presence, I really didn't know much about it. And I connected with a friend on a past kind of colleague that I'd met, reconnected with her on LinkedIn. She was a family medicine physician. And I was seeing all of this on her LinkedIn. I was seeing all this veteran work. And I thought she was, family medicine, in the clinic up in Oceanside. And I picked up the phone and we connected. Her husband was a 22-year retired Marine vet. And she decided to, kind of pool their knowledge and start doing veteran disability exams. And I then joined them and began doing veteran disability exams, really just out of kind of curiosity. And I'm not going to lie, a little bit of boredom. I was making so much at locums and I had nothing to do when I was back home. And so I thought, sure. She was so excited about it. And I began doing it at the beginning of 2022. Yes, that sounds right. And nope, 21, the beginning of 21 and January. And it was, I was by that point, I had not touched an adult in a clinical sense in 10 years. Pediatrician, right? I just hadn't. These are non-clinical, non-diagnostic, non-treatment exams. Veterans, they themselves, file their claims of what, an ailment and injury that they may have sustained or got worse in service. And then as a physician, a third-party physician, military physicians cannot do this work. They need a, impartial third party. We assess the claim. We are presented with their medical records. We can corroborate any x-rays or imaging or visits that happened in service. We'll do a brief physical exam. These are often musculoskeletal claims. So it's range of motion. Maybe it's measuring a scar and kind of completing a questionnaire and returning it to the VA. So again, it's 9 to 5 or not even, I'd say probably 9 to 2. It is, again, clinical. Veterans are so friendly and polite. I think initially I thought there might be, hardened war vets with a prosthesis slung over their shoulder. It's not that at all. It has been just wonderful, very, very nice, American service members who have served our country. Some have been deployed, some not, some have stayed domestic, but all with great stories. And ironically, I feel like it's made me a better pediatrician. I really enjoy just talking to them and hearing their stories, but also a reintroduction to, what medicine looks like in their age demographic as well.
That is cool. Yeah. It's the CMP exams. Everyone has to go through them when they're separating or retiring. So you automatically have that population built in of like, hey, you have to do this. So there's plenty of opportunity there from that perspective. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you're exactly right. I had nothing to do with them when I was active duty. I had to go through one myself as I was separating. They're pretty intensive, few hours long. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're paid based off complexity and then based off like the amount of time you spend with the patient. Is that correct? Or is it just based off hourly?
Well, I think neither, at least for me. But no, I don't think you're wrong. Yeah. I think that it just depends on the avenue you take. There are staffing agencies, there are medical groups. There are just a few ways to access veteran disability. I'll tell you the way that I am compensated in the medical group I work with, I am paid per veteran per claim. So actually, the complexity of the claim does not matter at all. It's whether it's a claim or not. It could be a claim of migraine headaches. It could be a claim for, prostate cancer. It doesn't matter what the claim is, but I'm paid per veteran per claim. So if I see one veteran who has 1 to 2 claims, I will, I could probably knock off that in 15 minutes, but I'd be paid, I think, $130 for that. But if it's a veteran who, say, has 15 claims, a new separation, as you just described, that could be a visit that takes longer, more documentation, more chart review, and that I'd be compensated about $700. So that is the difference. But staffing agencies love to pay. I would advise if anyone is doing veteran disability, you do not want to be paid hourly. Definitely not. Yeah. Because that you will be shortchanged and undercut, but you may not even know that there are other options. But the way I prefer the way that I work does it.
Yeah, the way that you mentioned it is the way that I understood it too. You just said it with a lot more elegance than how I asked the question. But that's exactly right. Sure. That's how I've heard it as well. And it's kind of a win-win for the veteran as well too, right? The provider's incentivized to really go through your claims and to try and, help you get as much disability as you can and vice versa. So that is awesome. I did learn something interesting.
I just wanted to say, you as the provider are not in charge of determining whether the veteran gets the claim or not. So I just want to, that is not on us. You just are very objective with what you find in your questionnaire, and it is the VA who determines the rating. So it is not up to the physician.
You stole the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say. The other interesting thing I'll say then is that I learned that actually in order to get a disability claim for hypertension, they do not look at the systolic number. They look at the diastolic, because the veterans are going and running around the clinic before their vitals check and then coming in and getting their blood pressure checked. I mean, I'm sure you saw a lot of crazy stuff.
Well, they would stop taking their meds a week before their visit, and that also not recommended. So exactly. Yeah, don't get me started on some of my thoughts on VA. Sure. There's a lot. Right. There's a lot.
Yeah, but grateful to have served. I'm grateful for everyone who has served for sure. Right. Awesome. So we talked about per diem. We talked about locums. We talked about VA. Am I missing anything? Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I could. I mean, in the interest of time, I've done a lot. As you can tell, I kind of got the bug of, what else didn't they teach us? What else is available to us? They would have had me doing a 3-year GI fellowship when instead I'm having so much fun doing all of these other things. I am more than quadrupling my salary when I was a full-time pediatrician, where my starting salary in 2014 was $125,000. And, I was told that was the best I'd ever get. That's just, the peds, la. And I thought, no. And so for all of these different things that I am describing and mentioning, and oh, by the way, even with locums, my last contract, I was able to negotiate $3,200 a day flat. I've had ones that were even some days, if I was doing clinic and I was in and out, if there was a lot going on, I've had $4,200 days. So my point is, this can be cumulative. These things can add up. In 2024, I had 2 six-figure months, just kind of stacking all of these things on top of each other. They were, somewhat busy, but the fact that I even could do it was amazing. And then I turned around and took, 3 months off. I took the summer off, went to the Olympics, had a great time. So I just want to give that, kind of latching my perception of what a real doctor job looks like, that it doesn't mean I go to one clinic every day. Someone tells me where to be, what time to be there, gives me my schedule. The way of working this way really can be tenable for anyone. But as I said, in the interest of time, I'll just talk quickly about two. One is expert witness work, or being a physician expert witness, which I think our minds immediately go to an episode of Law and Order SVU and someone sitting on a stand and a wood all over the courtroom and an angry lawyer slamming his, hand on the wood in front of you and telling you didn't go to med school. And it is not that. I just know that that's where our mind goes there. And then we also think that it's always malpractice, that is the only intersection between law and medicine. And that is not true. I'd say in many civil cases, the civil cases that I've worked on, I've been doing this work about 4 years, less than 30% of the cases I've worked on have been malpractice. Most of them are simple kind of liability. For instance, I worked on a case where, two families living next to each other, it might have been military housing, and one family's dog, but the other family's child on the face. So she had to go to the ER, and then she went to plastics, and then she went to her pediatrician. So at the end of it, there was a stack of medical records. And, this is, we know how to read these records, but these are lawyers. They don't know. So they just needed a pediatrician to translate into 5th grade, 8th grade English what happened and what the course was. They weren't, none of the physicians who treated the child were at fault or even suspected of being at fault. It was just, tell us what happened. And I was able to do that to the tune of $600 an hour. So that is the type, there is a lot of money and people will pay a lot for our expertise. But we unfortunately are conditioned to, the offers that we get through clinical medicine have shaped the way that we, imagine what our time, our energy, and our expertise are worth. And that is why we are, shunted into these full-time clinical jobs, hit with non-competes, so that we never really truly see the value of our degree. But I am charging $600 and $700 and $800 an hour to opine on some of these cases. Some as a pediatrician, I've worked on a child abuse case. I've worked on some other types of cases, but I recognize, listen, these cases are happening with or without me. I'm coming down as a person of honesty and integrity. Whatever I say on either side, it will be the same. And I have worked on both sides of malpractice cases as well. So, I wouldn't have wanted to start on malpractice, but after a few years of getting used to it and kind of understanding the lay of the land, being an expert witness I also think has made me a much better physician. I've worked on cases where, 6 months later, I have an exact same type of child with the same condition in front of me, but I was paid $600 an hour to research and read and write about that case. And here I am, putting it all to use into action. So I think I think within, 5 years outside of training, any physicians should start considering, being open to this kind of work. It's a lot of reading and writing, by the way. It's reading charts, it's emails, and it's potentially writing a report sometimes, but it's honestly a lot of fun. It's like a puzzle. Yeah. It's fun.
That does sound fun.
Stimulating.
Yeah. It exposes you to new and interesting things, I'm sure, all the time.
Right.
And the pay sounds great too, to be honest. So
yeah.
So
that one is
remote.
Exactly. It is. I have not seen a single lawyer in person. In fact, last summer, I was working on a big case last year. I from the beginning, it was going to trial, so that was not a surprise. But I'd been doing this for a few years, and I knew, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I can do this. But by the time they told me the trial date, I already had my trip to Europe planned, and I was there for 6 weeks over the summer. So I told them, I said, listen, I'm happy to, be an expert if it can be done remotely, but you're telling me this date a little late, and I already have my summer plans. So I testified remotely via Zoom for a San Diego district court from, it actually went 2 days. So the first day I was in Vienna, Austria, and the second day I was in London. And I was sitting there with blazer up top and shorts on the bottom, and being paid $700 an hour to talk about this case. But also I knew this was coming. So I was reading and writing and doing things kind of throughout my summer, a few hours a day, maybe, and being paid an incredible rate. So through traveling around Europe last August, working on this case, I earned $20,000 not in the United States. I feel
That's
very
awesome.
blessed. I feel very blessed that I was able, that happened, and it can happen for any of us. Yeah.
Wow, absolutely. Well, that is awesome. What a cool way to travel, get paid. And it sounds like still have the freedom to explore and do all the things that you wanted to do while you were traveling. So I would imagine hopefully that paid for a good chunk, if not all of your trip, which is cool.
Yeah, exactly. So, and another thing about, both this work and veteran disability work, these are clinical. So you are not restricted to your state of licensure. You have an active state medical license in any state. You can participate in this work across state lines. So locums per diem, yes, you need that medical degree for that state that you're practicing in. But a lot of this non-clinical work, state licensure is not significant in that way. Okay.
Wow. That is good to know.
Yes. And the last one I'll tell your listeners about is probably somewhat ubiquitous, and I think they've all heard of it. And that is aesthetics. That's Botox and filler practices. I'll say in 2017, I was at a dinner party, and a friend's dad I think he was a cardiovascular surgeon in Iowa. He's, sitting around and saying, hey, you guys should, looking at me and some of these other younger doctors saying, you guys should start a Botox and filler practice. And I looked at him so indignantly, and I said, I'm a real doctor. I would not ever do such a thing. And he's like chuckles to himself, and he said, listen, I get it. He said, but you're in Southern California. He's like, I'm doing great in Iowa, like of all places. And I thought about it, and I went back to him a little while later, and I thought, but I'm a pediatrician, I'm not derm or plastics. And he said, you suture kids' faces in an ER. That's harder. That is harder than this. And I said, you have a point. So I ended up just taking an afternoon class. A lot of there are some classes that are mobile, that travel. We'll come to a city, rent out a ballroom at an Omni hotel, bring in plastic surgeons or derm and really do it. A couple hours didactic, couple hours of hands-on practice. And then I thought, this is kind of fun. Some of my friends are asking about this. I was in my mid-30s at the time. We were thinking about it. Again, I'm in Southern California, which is the hub of such, I don't want to call it vanity, but just awareness of one's face. Long story short, I began a small concierge, boutique aesthetics practice. And I thought eventually I would turn it into, maybe a med spa, some sort of brick and mortar. But a couple years into it, as you've also can tell, I do a lot of different things. And I like that I do a lot of different things. And I thought opening a med spa is doing one thing, and that's not me. So I continue to just work the way I work, which is friends and family, not really marketing, but enjoying it. And, people having parties and people telling friends. So I still was earning about $6,000 to $7,000 a month just by word of mouth from these parties. But again, it wasn't anything I could say I loved doing. But in the process, I came across a few nurse practitioners who wanted to start their own practices, which I wanted to mention this because I'm sure a lot of your listeners have also potentially been approached by nurse practitioners or PAs about becoming a medical director. And many of us, tense up and immediately shut it down because how terrifying to have someone else working under your license, despite the fact that often without us even knowing it at these big hospitals. But that's another episode. So I initially had that thought too, like, well, I didn't go into this just to be a medical director, but I had some coffee, some conversation with this one woman initially, and she had been doing this longer than me. She was so smart, so motivated, taking courses. It's kind of like if you're going to the ER, are you asking the doctor to put in your IV, or are you asking the nurse who does it 40 times a day? And it's the same. If you were to go to a plastics or derm office, probably not the doctor doing the Botox. It's probably a nurse or someone else. So I developed a level of trust with this woman, and I eventually agreed to be her medical director. And so now I've, kind of honed my skills and meeting these often women who are looking for medical directors. And, we're reviewing their charts. I understand their education. They know their limits. They know I'm close. They know what to do. We've written orders. We've written the like I said, the consents, the physical exam. And so this is something that is somewhat passive income to be able to be their medical director for their small practices. And I charge them $1,000 a month to be their medical director. So that is somewhat passive, but it is just a way, I'd say, if you have been approached or any of your listeners have been approached, I think that there's absolutely space in the state of California. Nurse practitioners still do need physician oversight. I know in some states they can work independently entirely by themselves, but in California, they still do need a physician to oversee them. And so I think that they there can be a relationship there. It can be profitable for both of you. And it can be a great, I think, learning experience and learning tool.
Wow, that is awesome. Yeah, you have definitely done doctoring differently. And it's really, really cool to see, because I feel like a lot of times, folks feel trapped. They feel that golden stethoscope. They feel like they can't escape. And so, it's really cool to see and learn about these options. I remember when we first started talking about doing the podcast, you were like, oh, I don't have a lot of real estate experience. I don't have a lot of value to add. And I was like, no, please come on the podcast, because no one has talked about this stuff before. I have learned so much. So this is awesome. So you have been doctoring differently. You started doctoring differently. Tell us a little bit more about that and how folks can reach out to you and connect.
Cool. Well, thank you so much again for having me. And you're right. When I saw, properties and real estate, I was like, oh, that's not me. But you're absolutely right. I have found such incredible ways to work and to live as a physician. And by the way, quadruple my income. I told you my starting salary was $125,000. Last year, I cleared $500,000. Still as a general pediatrician. And as I told you, spending the summer in Europe and working remotely half the time. And so just seeing that this is so possible despite being told it wasn't. And that's what gets me. So it was in 2020 near the end where I was doing about 4 of the things I talked about these past few minutes. And by the end of 2020, I'm looking around like, I'm doing really good. I didn't know at the beginning, what 2020 was going to look like for me. I'm on the very edges of a quote unquote real, doctor job. But I thought, I've really figured something else out here. And so I'm trying to call my classmates and colleagues and I'm ranting on their voicemails. And I was like, you can do other things. Let me tell you what you can do. And then I thought, this is not an effective way to teach and convey all of this knowledge. Not only the things that I do, but, getting malpractice insurance and getting your own health insurance and how to think about your retirement plan. And like those things that really do keep good doctors in bad jobs. Those not mentioning, not knowing what else is out there. But what about my health insurance? What about my kids? What about this? And all of those things kind of close in and we stay. So I thought, maybe I make a course. No, I'm not an actual educator, but I've gone to school long enough. I know how these things go. So I created a 6-week curriculum on a whiteboard in my condo. And I just started, thought, okay, let me start with big picture. You have permission. Let me I'll tell you, just that permission thing is big for us. You have permission to do other things. There are no rules to this career. You've been told there are rules. I know. I was too. But in fact, you can go per diem. You can do locums. You can do new things. And then the second week, all the clinical things I talk about, which are per diem and locums and independent telemedicine and even DPC I teach about now. The third week, I get into all of the non-clinicals and all of the things I've talked about, plus so many more. I then was like, you know what? Let me teach about resignation. We don't know how to resign, and it's scary. How to write a resignation letter, how to bridge the gap to your next opportunity, and then how to negotiate, actually how to talk to a recruiter. These are, as we talked about with veteran disability, there are many ways that compensation can work, and we don't know. We don't know what they are. So we don't know how to negotiate. We don't know what our power is there. So doing a whole module on having these negotiation conversations as well. So that in August of 2021 was when the first Doctoring Differently cohort of students came through, of physicians across the country. And so now I've been teaching this for almost 4 years. I've recorded the course. So it's a digital, almost 9-hour course. And I update it often with all of these lessons and modules about each of the things that we've talked about on the program and so much more. So that's what Doctoring Differently is. We have monthly Q&A where the whole community gets together. I may give a short lesson, but we're also answering each other's questions and new things we find out, new things we've done, successes, negotiation successes, we talk about and share. And it's been physicians of all specialties, I'll tell you. It's been amazing to watch. We are all the same, ultimately.
That's amazing. Awesome. Yeah, it's so cool to just see what amazing things you're doing, see what other things that physicians are doing. It just really opens your eyes to all the possibilities that are out there and gives you insight into hey, this is what I need to do. This is how I can do it. There's other people who have done this before, and getting in the right rooms is so huge. And so it's awesome that you're offering that for folks. What's the best way for folks to follow you or to reach out and learn more? Is that through social media or?
Yes, they can find me at Doctoring Differently on Instagram, on Twitter or X, Facebook as well. And then they can go to doctoringdifferently.com. And that's where you can find all of the insights, all of the things I talk about, and join the course, join the community. This is where it's at. This is where you start. You don't have to have the long runway necessarily. You don't have to have all of the answers before you maybe resign or make a change in your career, but come get the exposure and the education and the knowledge and the community all right here.
That's amazing. We'll be sure to include all the links in the show notes for Doctoring Differently and how you can reach Dr. Naomi Lawrence Reed. This has been awesome. Any parting shots? Anything you want to add before we wrap things up?
Just want your listeners to know there are no rules. So if you've been thinking to yourself, I can't quit, I have to stay full time, you don't. There are so many options available to you, and you don't need permission, but if you do, here it is. You have permission. If you want to do something new, explore something new, you've heard the things I'm saying. You hear the things that Alex is talking about on this podcast every week, all of these investment opportunities, and maybe you're sitting on the sidelines and thinking, it's too risky. Oh, I don't know. You're still going through it in your head, get to a place where you can do it. I promise you can. We're living, we're learning, but we're making educated choices, and you can do anything you want.
That sounds amazing. I'll add one more thing to it that I think will be helpful. Worst comes to worst, say doctoring differently does not work out. You can always go back to your clinical job. So your biggest fear is your present day reality.
That's true. It's true. And I'll tell you, I think doctoring differently is so successful because I am still doing the things. As I told you, I just left a locum shift. So I teach about locums, but it's not like, I did it once 10 years ago. I'm still doing and negotiating and growing and learning. So this is a very live and active and a living group. So, and I know yours is as well. Awesome. So thanks for what you do. I'm learning so much from your podcast and your platform. So thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, hey, it's been awesome. And with that, we'll wrap things up. It's been Dr. Naomi Lawrence Reed and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial, medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.